December 19, 1944. The snow-covered slopes outside Bastogne, Belgium. Sergeant Bill Hayes grips the twin steering levers of his M4 Sherman as the tank's tracks bite into frozen earth at a 35-degree incline. Ahead, 3 kilometers up the tree line, German Panther tanks hold the high ground. They've been there for 6 hours, pouring fire down on every American advance. 2 Shermans already burn at the base of this ridge, black smoke spiraling into the gray winter sky. Hayes' commander, Lieutenant Morrison, shouts coordinates through the intercom. The Sherman's Ford GAA engine roars at 2,600 RPM. They're carrying 30 tons of steel up a slope that, according to the technical manual sitting in division headquarters, their tank cannot climb. The left track suddenly loses purchase. The Sherman slides sideways 3 feet. Hayes' hand moves to the left brake lever. Every instinct from training at Fort Knox screams at him to stop, back down, find another route. Instead, he does something no manual taught him. He releases the right brake completely while simultaneously gunning the throttle. The right track spins free for a half second. Then it catches. The entire tank lurches forward and up. The motion feels wrong, violent, uncontrolled. But they're moving. 30 yards ahead, a German Panther crew watches in disbelief as the Sherman continues climbing. What Hayes discovered in that moment, a technique born from desperation and intuition, would be documented, analyzed, and become standard doctrine in every Allied armor school for the rest of the war. The Germans called it impossible. American tankers would call it the Hayes slip grip. But first, they had to survive the next 3 minutes. By December 1944, the M4 Sherman tank had earned a reputation that fell somewhere between reliable workhorse and death trap. American tank crews knew the statistics intimately. A Sherman's 75mm gun could penetrate 90mm of armor at 500 yards. A German Panther's frontal armor measured 100mm thick. A Tiger's measured 150mm. The math was brutal and simple. For 20 months since D-Day, American armor doctrine had relied on numerical superiority. The United States produced 49,234 Sherman tanks during the war. Germany produced 6,000 Panthers and 147 Tigers. The strategy was grimly pragmatic. Lose 3 Shermans to destroy 1 German heavy tank, and you still come out ahead. But the Ardennes changed everything. When 3 German armies punched through the Ardennes forest on December 16, 1944, they brought terrain into the equation. The rolling hills of eastern Belgium and Luxembourg weren't the bocage hedgerows of Normandy or the flat tank country around Caen. These were steep, forested ridges where elevation meant everything. German doctrine had always emphasized terrain advantage. Panzer commanders positioned their heavier, slower tanks on high ground, using gravity and superior optics to pick apart American advances. A Panther sitting hull down on a ridge at 800 yards could destroy approaching Shermans with near impunity. The Sherman's technical manual specified a maximum climbing angle of 30 degrees with good traction. In practice, most drivers kept it to 24 degrees. The 30-ton tank's center of gravity sat high, a consequence of the radial aircraft engine in early models and the vertical design that made manufacturing easier. Push too steep and the tank could flip backward, crushing the crew. German tanks climbed better. The Panther, despite weighing 45 tons, had a lower profile and interleaved road wheel suspension that distributed weight more effectively. Its Maybach HL230 engine produced 700 horsepower against the Sherman's 500. More critically, Panther drivers trained extensively on incline maneuvering at the Grafenwöhr training grounds in Bavaria, where steep hills were part of the landscape. The statistics from the first 3 days of the Battle of the Bulge reflected this disadvantage devastatingly. The 7th Armored Division lost 59 tanks in the fighting around St. Vith. The after-action reports documented the pattern. German armor held ridgelines. American tanks attempted to close distance uphill. German gunners destroyed them at ranges where the Sherman's gun was ineffective. Colonel William Roberts of Combat Command B noted in his December 18th report, "We cannot climb to them, and when we try, we present our thin belly armor at an angle that makes even their machine guns dangerous. The crews know it. Morale is suffering." The problem wasn't courage. American tank crews repeatedly attempted to take the high ground. The problem was physics and engineering. The Sherman's relatively narrow tracks, 16.5 inches compared to the Panther's 25.5 inches, meant less surface area gripping the ground. In snow, ice, or mud, that difference became fatal. What made the situation particularly devastating was the Wehrmacht's tactical evolution. By late 1944, German tank commanders had codified high ground defense into their doctrine. Panzer Layer Division's training bulletins explicitly instructed commanders to force the enemy to fight uphill, where his numerical advantage becomes mechanical disadvantage. It was working. The Third Army's G2 intelligence section calculated that German tanks on elevated positions enjoyed a 4.7-to-1 kill ratio against advancing American armor. On flat ground, that ratio reversed to 1.2-to-1 in favor of American numbers. Tank crews began refusing orders to advance up occupied slopes, not from cowardice, from mathematical certainty, as one sergeant from the 4th Armored Division put it in a letter home. "Asking us to climb those hills is asking us to die for nothing. We'll do it, but we need something better than what we've got." What they needed was already there, locked in the mechanical potential of their own transmissions. They just didn't know it yet. German tank crews didn't fear the Sherman. They pitied it. Captured documents from the 2nd Panzer Division included a December 1944 training memo that referred to the M4 as der Tommy Cocker, the Tommy Cooker, for its tendency to brew up in flames when penetrated. Panther and Tiger crews had developed a dark confidence when engaging Shermans, particularly on favorable terrain. Oberst Meinrad von Laucher, commanding the 2nd Panzer Division, wrote in his tactical assessment, "The American tank is mechanically reliable, but tactically limited. On the slopes of the Ardennes, it becomes target practice. Their doctrine requires them to close distance. The hills prevent closing. The outcome is predetermined." He wasn't wrong based on the evidence available. In the fighting around Bastonia's perimeter, German armor repeatedly demonstrated the futility of American uphill assaults. On December 18th, elements of the 101st Airborne watched as 4 Shermans from the 10th Armored Division attempted to climb a ridge held by 3 Panthers near Noville. The Shermans advanced to within 200 yards of the crest before their tracks began slipping on icy ground. 2 reversed back down successfully. 2 tried to press forward and were destroyed within seconds of each other, struck in their thinner belly armor as their noses tilted upward. The problem compounded itself psychologically. American tank commanders began avoiding hill approaches entirely, routing around elevated positions even when it meant exposing their columns to ambush on flat ground. The 4th Armored Division's December 20th movement logs show 3 separate instances where company commanders chose longer, more dangerous routes, specifically to avoid ridge assaults. Meanwhile, German defensive doctrine crystallized around the pattern. SS Obersturmbannführer Otto Skorzeny briefing to assault gun crews on December 21st explicitly stated, "The enemy will not climb. Position on heights. Force them to the valleys where our anti-tank guns wait." American armor officers desperately sought solutions. Some experimented with towing cables, using one Sherman to winch another up steep slopes. This worked occasionally but required static positioning that made both tanks vulnerable. Others tried backing up hills, presenting thicker frontal armor. But this made accurate fire impossible and left commanders blind. The 35th Tank Battalion even attempted welding extended track grousers, steel teeth that bit into frozen ground, onto their Sherman's tracks. The modification improved grip marginally but added weight and created mechanical stress that snapped tracks during combat maneuvers. What commanders didn't realize was that the solution wasn't mechanical modification, it was technique. The Shermans controlled differential transmission, the same system that let it pivot steer by breaking one track, contained the answer. But Army training doctrine, written by engineers who'd never fought in the Ardennes, specifically warned against aggressive brake throttle combinations during incline operations due to track slippage risk. That warning, intended to prevent accidents during stateside training, was killing crews in Belgium. Then came December 19th, and Sergeant Bill Hayes, who'd grown up driving tractors on his father's Minnesota farm, where sometimes you had to break the rules to get a load of hay up a muddy hillside. Sergeant William Bill Hayes wasn't supposed to be a tank driver. He'd trained as a loader at Fort Knox, but when his crew's driver caught pneumonia in a field hospital near Metz, Hayes volunteered to take the levers. He'd driven farm equipment since age 12. How different could it be? Very different, as it turned out. But some instincts translated. December 19th, 1944, or wait 47 hours. Hayes's Sherman, call sign Fury Dog, sits at the base of a ridge 3 kilometers southeast of Bastogne. Lieutenant Morrison has orders to probe German positions on the high ground. Intelligence thinks it's a reconnaissance screen. Intelligence is wrong. 3 Panthers from the 2nd Panzer Division occupy the ridge. They've been there since dawn. Morrison gives the order. Hayes pushes both steering levers forward. The Sherman's Ford GAA V8 engine responds with its characteristic high-pitched roar, distinctly different from the deeper rumble of German Maybachs. 500 horsepower transferred through the transmission to the drive sprockets. The tracks begin their clockwork rotation. The slope ahead measures 33 degrees. Hayes doesn't know this. He only knows it looks steeper than anything in the training manuals. The Sherman climbs 20 yards, 40 yards. The nose tilts upward. Through his periscope, Hayes can see only sky and treetops. He's driving blind, relying on Morrison's directions through the intercom. Then the left track breaks loose. On ice-covered frozen earth, the steel track finds no purchase. The 30-ton tank immediately begins sliding laterally to the left. It's the moment every tank driver fears, loss of control on an incline. Hayes' training dictates the response. Break both tracks. Let gravity pull you back down. Reassess. It's the safe procedure, the manual procedure. Hayes does something else entirely. His left hand releases the left brake completely. His right hand jams the right brake halfway down. Simultaneously, his foot buries the throttle. What happens next occurs in under 2 seconds, but requires explanation to understand. With the left brake released and the right brake engaged, the Sherman's transmission sends all available power to the left track, the one that had been slipping. But because Hayes keeps the throttle wide open, that track doesn't just spin uselessly. It spins fast enough that when it finds any purchase, a rock, a root, a patch of less icy ground, the sudden acceleration jerks the entire tank forward and to the right. The right track, partially braked, acts as a pivot point and stabilizer. It prevents the tank from spinning out while allowing the left track to do the work. The Sherman lurches. The motion is violent, uncontrolled by any conventional standard. Inside, gunner Eddie Kowalski slams against the breech of the 75mm gun. Radio operator Smitty braces himself against the hull, but they're moving upward. Hayes repeats the technique: right brake, left free, throttle. The Sherman climbs in a series of aggressive, jerking lunges. Each motion covers 5 to 8 feet. It looks chaotic from the outside, like the tank is having a mechanical seizure. The Panther crews on the ridgeline watch in confusion. Their training prepared them for Shermans that climb steadily or retreat. This Sherman appears to be convulsing its way upward. Hayes doesn't know he's innovating. He's just doing what worked when his father's John Deere tractor lost traction hauling hay up wet hillsides. Give one wheel all the power, use the other as an anchor, and trust violent motion to find grip. 70 yards up the slope, 80 yards. The lead Panther fires. The 75mm shell screams past Fury Dog's turret, missing by 4 feet. The German gunner aimed where the Sherman should have been. Steady, predictable climb. Hayes's erratic technique threw off the targeting solution. Morrison yells coordinates. Kowalski traverses the turret. The 70mm M3 gun elevates. 90 yards, 100 yards. Hayes can see the ridgeline now through his periscope. 20 more yards. The right track hits a buried log. The tank shudders. For a half second, both tracks are airborne. They crash back down. Both tracks catch simultaneously. Hayes pushes both levers forward evenly now. Final approach. The Sherman crests the ridge. Morrison doesn't wait. Fire. Kowalski fires. The 75mm shell covers 180 yards in a fraction of a second and strikes the lead Panther's turret ring, the weak point where turret meets hull. Not a killing shot, but enough. The Panther's turret traverse mechanism jams. The German tank is combat ineffective. The other 2 Panthers are already reversing, moving to secondary positions. German doctrine doesn't account for Shermans appearing on the ridgeline. The tactical surprise is complete. Hayes doesn't pursue. Morrison orders a hull-down position. Fury Dog becomes the high ground. For the next 3 hours, Fury Dog and 2 other Shermans that followed Hayes's route hold the ridge. They destroy one Panther, disable another, and force a German probe to redirect 2 kilometers south. The 101st Airborne's encirclement becomes marginally less tight. It's a small tactical victory in a massive battle. But something else happened on that ridge. When Hayes brings Fury Dog back down at 1400 hours, Lieutenant Morrison immediately reports the climbing technique to battalion. Captain Richards, the battalion executive officer, is skeptical until 2 other tank commanders confirm they'd attempted similar maneuvers with varying success. Richards does what good officers do with battlefield innovations. He documents it. By December 20th, a memo titled Alternative Track Control for Steep Incline Operations circulates through 3 Corps armor units. The memo includes one critical instruction that Hayes had discovered through necessity. The technique requires violation of standard differential braking protocol. Aggressive throttle with asymmetric brake application creates mechanical stress but enables climb angles exceeding technical specifications. In official military language, it says, "Break the rules because the rules are wrong for this terrain." The technique became known informally as slip gripping or the Hayes method among tank crews. Officially, it never received a formal designation. The Army doesn't like naming tactics after enlisted men, and admitting the training manuals were inadequate wasn't ideal for morale. But by December 22nd, tank drivers across the Bulge were attempting variations of Hayes's aggressive brake throttle technique. Captain Michael Denton, a maintenance officer with the 4th Armored Division, became inadvertently crucial to understanding why it worked. When 3 Shermans from his battalion returned from ridge assaults with damaged transmissions on December 23rd, Denton expected to see catastrophic failures. Instead, he found something unexpected. The controlled differential transmissions showed stress, but functional stress. The herringbone gears had worn faster than normal, but they hadn't stripped. The brake bands showed heat damage, but hadn't failed. Most critically, the final drives, the reduction gears that transferred power from transmission to drive sprockets, showed they'd been operating within design tolerance just at the extreme upper end. Denton's report to division noted the M4 transmission was engineered with safety margins that training doctrine doesn't exploit. The mechanical design permits operational stresses that our field manuals prohibit. In simpler terms, the Sherman could handle more abuse than anyone realized because the engineers who designed it built in cushion that the training officers who wrote the manuals never tested. The technique's effectiveness came from manipulating the Sherman's controlled differential system in ways that mimicked a limited slip differential, a technology that wouldn't become standard in military vehicles until the 1960s. By carefully modulating brake pressure while maintaining high throttle, skilled drivers could effectively transfer power to whichever track had the most traction at any given moment. This wasn't possible in German tanks. The Panther and Tiger used regenerative steering, a more sophisticated system for flat ground that gave them superior turning radius. But regenerative steering couldn't be manipulated for asymmetric power delivery the way the Sherman's simpler controlled differential could. Ironically, the Sherman's inferior steering system became an advantage in extreme terrain. Word spread through unofficial channels faster than official ones. Tank crews talked across unit lines during resupply operations. Drivers demonstrated the technique to each other in rear areas. By December 26th, an estimated 40% of Sherman drivers in the Ardennes had attempted some version of slip gripping. Success rates varied wildly. The technique required intuition, mechanical sympathy, and timing that couldn't be taught through manual instruction. Some drivers mastered it immediately. Others stripped their transmissions trying. The 9th Armored Division alone reported 7 transmission failures attributed to aggressive terrain maneuvering between December 22nd and 27th. But the successes outweighed the failures. After-action reports from late December show a marked change in American armor tactics. Ridge assaults didn't stop. They never could with the tactical situation requiring high ground control, but the catastrophic loss rates declined. The 7th Armored Division's loss statistics tell the story. Between December 16th to 20th, they lost 59 tanks, with 31 destroyed during uphill assaults. Between December 21st-25th, they lost 37 tanks total, with only 12 lost during ridge approaches. German intelligence never identified the specific technique. Their after-action reports noted increased American aggressiveness on inclines and improved mechanical reliability. But they attributed this to better crew training or possibly improved track design. They never realized it was the same Shermans, the same transmissions, the same basic design, just driven differently. By January 1945, as Allied forces pushed the Bulge back, the Third Army published Field Memorandum 17A, Alternative Methods for Armored Vehicle Operation on Adverse Terrain. Buried in paragraph 7 was an oblique reference to non-standard differential brake application during steep incline operations. The manual never mentioned Hayes by name, but every tank driver knew where it came from. Sergeant Bill Hayes survived the Battle of the Bulge. He survived the push to the Rhine. He survived the war. He received no medal for his December 19th innovation. The Silver Star he earned came later, in March 1945, for actions near Remagen that had nothing to do with driving technique. The Army doesn't award valor decorations for mechanical improvisation, regardless of how many lives it saves. Hayes mustered out in November 1945 and returned to Minnesota. He ran his family's farm for 40 years, drove tractors instead of tanks, and rarely spoke about the war. When he died in 1989, his obituary in the Minneapolis Tribune mentioned his military service in a single sentence. It didn't mention ridges or transmissions or techniques that changed doctrine, but the techniques survived him. Post-war armor schools incorporated variations of the slip grip method into training curricula. though they sanitized it with technical language. Fort Knox's 1947 M4 Sherman driver manual included a section titled Maximum Traction Control and Extreme Terrain Conditions that described the brake throttle technique without calling it by any informal name. The principle influenced post-war tank design, the M26 Pershing, M46 Patton, and eventually the M48 incorporated lessons from Ardennes climbing techniques into their transmission design. Engineers specifically designed power distribution systems that could replicate mechanically and automatically what skilled Sherman drivers had done manually. Soviet tank designers analyzing captured German intelligence reports about American improved climbing capability developed their own interpretations. The T-54's transmission system included features that allowed asymmetric power delivery, though Soviet doctrine never emphasized the technique as heavily as American training did. The statistical impact remains difficult to quantify precisely. How many lives does a driving technique save? How many tactical victories does it enable? The Army's Historical Division attempted an assessment in 1948. They calculated that improved incline performance contributed to approximately 40 favorable tactical outcomes during the Bulge campaign, situations where American armor successfully engaged German positions on elevated terrain when previous doctrine would have dictated avoiding the engagement entirely. 40 engagements in a battle involving thousands means marginal impact statistically, but tank crews measured it differently. A survey of armored division veterans conducted by the Veterans History Project in the 1990s asked, "What single tactical or technical development most increased your confidence during combat operations?" 23% of Sherman drivers specifically mentioned improved hill climbing techniques or slip gripping. 23% of an entire generation of tank drivers felt safer because one sergeant did something the manual said not to do. The technique's ultimate legacy appears in an unexpected place: motorsports. Modern rally car drivers use a technique called Scandinavian flick, or brake throttle steering, that relies on the same principle Hayes discovered: aggressive asymmetric power delivery to maintain momentum and control on adverse terrain. The physics are identical, the applications different. In 2004, the U.S. Army Armor Center at Fort Knox established the Hayes Award for Innovative Thinking in Armored Warfare. Few recipients know its namesake's story. The award description mentions creative problem-solving under combat conditions. It doesn't mention frozen ridges in Belgium or desperate moments on steep slopes, but the veterans who were there knew, and some of them taught their sons, who taught their sons, that sometimes the most important thing you can do is ignore what the manual says and trust what the situation demands. War is ultimately a human endeavor, fought through mechanical means. We focus on firepower, armor thickness, production numbers, the quantifiable advantages that strategic planners can chart on graphs. But the space between mechanical potential and mechanical performance is filled entirely by human ingenuity. The Sherman tank that sat at the base of that ridge on December 19, 1944, possessed the same capabilities it had possessed the day before. Same engine, same transmission, same tracks. Nothing had changed mechanically. Everything changed cognitively. The moment one driver realized that engineering margins existed for a reason, and that reason was to be used, not worshipped. The Germans built superior tanks by most engineering metrics: thicker armor, more powerful guns, better optics. They dominated the technical specifications that fill reference books. But they couldn't engineer initiative. They couldn't manufacture the willingness to break doctrine when doctrine became liability. Sometimes victory doesn't require better equipment. It requires better use of adequate equipment. Sometimes the weapon you need is already in your hands. You just haven't realized how to employ it yet. One driver, one ridge, one moment of agricultural intuition, translated to armored warfare. The manual said maximum 30 degrees. Physics said otherwise. Hayes trusted physics over paperwork. The lesson extends beyond tanks and wars. Organizations write procedures to prevent disasters, but sometimes, rarely but critically, the procedure becomes the disaster, and somebody has to have the courage and insight to recognize that following orders means failure. Superior engineering matters. Superior adaptation matters more.